Welcome, everyone, to the Fandom Podcast Network's True Believers Marvel MCU Infinity Saga Chronological Rewatch Podcast. Here on True Believers Marvel MCU Infinity Saga Podcast here, we're doing a rewatch, and we will rewatch the MCU in chronological order. Not movie release order, but chronological order. And we'll discuss our rewatch reactions and connections to the original Marvel comics and how they will relate to the past and current future MCU universe. Warning, spoilers ahead. This movie came out in 2008. We're going to be talking Iron Man. So if you haven't seen it already and you're watching and listening to a Marvel MCU podcast, I'd be very surprised. So this is episode 44 of True Believers, and welcome back. We are really excited to be revisiting the movie that started it all. My name is Kevin Reitzel. I'll be your co-host, and I'd like to welcome my fellow co-host and founder of the this little Fandom Podcast Network channel, Kyle. Welcome. How are you?
I am good. I am also Aluminum Man because we don't have enough money in the budget for iron.
Okay, mine was just cardboard. I'm just cardboard, man.
No, I'm very excited to be talking Iron Man, the movie that really started it all for the MCU.
Yes, definitely. It's exciting to be talking about this one in particular, but we can't do it alone, Kyle. We've got a special guest. Her movie Kung Fu is legendary, and we are honored to have her back here on the Fandom Podcast Network talking Iron Man for True Believers. Please welcome Lacee Aderhold.
This is like a Marvel team-up thing going on, isn't it?
Hello. I am just Whoa Man.
just whoa, man. I love it. Thank you for coming on for our chronological rewatch. What are you thinking? What are you thinking?
I'm excited. This is the first one I've done, although I've been following along, so I'm up to date with where we are. So we'll see what I can add to the mix.
All right. Well, first of all, if you are listening to this podcast or now watching on YouTube, make sure you check it out. And you can watch the video on YouTube if you're listening to the podcast, or if you're watching the YouTube and you want to take it to work, you could do both. So, but please join our True Believers Facebook page group. This is a great place for all of you Marvel fans there, and we love having continuous discussions on the Marvel MCU, so make sure you check out Facebook and just search True Believers, a Marvel MCU podcast fandom group. We would love to have you in there. So, but Kyle, we do something different around here. We have some phases. We don't do segments for these. We've got phases. What do we got?
Well, I don't know. I'm feeling a little out of phase. Maybe it's just a kind of little cold or something like that, or a little too long in some caves in some foreign country.
It's like what happened to Vision a couple times.
Something along those lines. But we got phase one here, which, we do our plot description and general discussion about this wonderful film. And then we move on to other phases as we go along. We do it the MCU proper here. We are the True Believers MCU podcast.
Yeah, well, we got 4 phases with some fun stuff in there, and so we'll make sure that we have some fun with that. So, but let's get right into it. We are discussing the movie that started it all, Iron Man 2008, which technically in the timeline takes place in 2010. I love how these MCU movies always seem to take place a few years in the future. So when something looks kind of futuristic, we're going, oh, so we have that to look to. Yet Tony, for some reason, can't get a cleaning crew out there to water wash his outside of his mansion there in Malibu. Because if you look at it, it looks kind of nasty at certain parts of the walls. Like, come on, take a water blaster to that thing, Tony.
Okay, wait. And to be all fairness, who really wants to go try to water blast Tony Stark's mansion when you don't know what could be coming out of it at any point?
You think he would have a robot to do such a thing?
Well,
Pepper to handle that kind of stuff. She hires the people.
The dummy was busy with armor work, and that's why he can't get the power washing.
Yeah, dummy. All right, so before we get any further, let's make sure that Vanity Fair Lady is out of the house and in the car. Let's go ahead and get into phase 1. This is where we do our plot description, general discussion, and cast comments. And here is what's happening with Tony Stark. He's a genius. Billionaire, playboy, philanthropist, son of legendary inventor and weapons contractor Howard Stark. When Tony Stark is assigned to give a weapons presentation to an Iraq unit led by Lieutenant Colonel James Rhodes, Rhodey, he's given a ride on enemy lines. That ride ends badly when Stark's Humvee, the Fun V that he is riding, is attacked by enemy combatants. He survives barely with a chest full of shrapnel and a car battery attached to his heart. In order to survive, he comes up with a way to miniaturize the battery and figures out that the battery can power something else. Thus, Iron Man is born. He uses his primitive device to escape from the cave in Iraq. Once back home, he then begins working on perfecting the Iron Man suit. But Obadiah Stain, the man who was put in charge of Stark Industries, has plans of his own to take over Tony's technology for his own nefarious plans. All right, guys, let's go back in time, back to 2008. I almost said 1982. Look for that on Time Warp this year.
It's because I'm here.
But let's go back to 1988. Okay, people still had some flip phones, right? You know, the smartphones were starting to come in. iPods were the rage. You know, certain music, a lot of music sucked during this time. Just put it that way.
But on purpose.
Yes. You know, we were watching some of those TV shows, but where were you when you first saw Iron Man? Lacey, start with you.
I saw the ads for the film, and immediately I was in. Now, Iron Man. Previously, I had been in a class for college that was about fables and fairy tales for a creative writing degree, and I had done a paper on Demon in the Bottle, which was a series of Iron Man dealing with alcoholism and the Vietnam War. And so I was really interested to figure out how they were going to update Iron Man properly, but I was ready. Like, I was in the second I saw the trailer. Yeah.
What about you, Kyle? Where were you? Where'd you see it?
I was here in Florida, and I was I'm like Lacey. First time I even heard about this, before we even got a trailer or anything, I was all in, especially when they announced the casting of Robert Downey Jr. I was like, oh, this is absolutely perfect casting for Tony Stark. I was all in with this. This was a weird, because we had been coming off of like X-Men, some of the X-Men films and some of those things with Fox, and we weren't quite sure what to expect with this. And really, like, Iron Man, they're gonna finally try to pull off Iron Man, and you know, not a huge character for the MCU at the time. So it was interesting when you think about it now, how people weren't ready to just jump all in on Iron Man when it came out compared to what we have now, when it doesn't matter what it is. If it has Marvel on it, people are flocking to go see it.
Right. Well, you know, it's interesting. I just did a little Google search because I was kind of wondering what was happening around the world during that week that Iron Man came out in 2008, and it came out May 2nd. May 3rd, there was a cyclone that passed through Miramar, killing more than 138,000 people. And May 12th, there was that earthquake in China that killed like 87,000 people. So stuff wasn't really happy during this time when Iron Man came out. But the Eurovision Song Contest takes place in Belgrade, Serbia, and the song Believe won. So there we go. I saw this in the theater, guys. I was living up to the hype of the trailers. Oh, yeah. And I didn't know what was happening after that. No one did. It was just Iron Man. But I was really curious about Robert Downey Jr. because I was thinking, like, okay, this is perfect casting, but it might be a train wreck afterwards if he resorts to his own ways. So let's see what happens. And boy, was I pleasantly surprised. I saw it more than once. Kyle.
I have a question for everybody in the panel. I know we'll actually talk about the scene later on, but I got to ask it now. Be honest, who stayed through the entire end of the film the first time around?
Oh.
I want to say I did, because I think it was kind of it reminded me, but I think some people were kind of doing the credit thing, but I think it came out before I saw the movie. There was a spoiler or something saying that there was something at the end that we should wait for. I think it was a some reviewer had seen it or something and had mentioned something, but I was seeing it with a group of friends, so we were like watching we were just hanging around talking around it anyway. We weren't sure, and then it kind of caught us by surprise. That was my first reaction, not knowing what was really happening. There was just this rumor, but no one was kind of like committed to it, but we were still hanging around. So I did see it when it first happened. Kyle, did you?
Oh yeah, I saw it because I'm kind of one of these guys who likes to stay through most of the credits anyway, and unless I'm just having to go answer the call of nature or something like that. But in this case, no, I was curious to see some of the creative team behind it, and bam, we got that now. But I know a lot of people who ended up going to see it again because they were like, I missed what? And I know we'll get to that scene later, but I think it's an important question because this is before we were trained to stay to the end of the credits of this kind of movie.
I haven't left the theater before the end of the credits since the Cannonball Run. I mean, you know, I'm not, and I have a film degree, so it's one of those things. You know, when you're a film person,
you pay respect to your peers that have worked on the film.
You watch everything, and chances are you'll see some of your friends from back in the day, you know, on the screen. So, and especially since Atlanta has become such a haven at this point, it's like every movie I see, it's just listed.
I started doing that in the 90s a lot, especially if it was a certain film. You know, if it was like a certain fandom type of film or something like that, I would probably do that as well, just because I was kind of curious.
Coming back when the Farrelly brothers did their the first 3 films they did, because with Me, Myself, and Irene, all of a sudden everybody was like, "Oh my gosh, you guys, you got to stay till the end of the post," and I was like, "Y'all, who are you talking to?"
Yeah.
I'm trying to get y'all to stay.
Well, the release date, as I said, was May 2nd, 2008. But I did want to ask you guys a question. Has your opinion changed of this film since your first viewing of this movie? Has it evolved over the years? Has your opinion pretty much stayed the same? Or is there things that you like more now or like least now? Kyle, start with you.
My opinion has not changed on this film. This film will always hold a very special place for me because it was the official start of the MCU. If anything, I even think the effects incredibly hold up well, even now. And Robert Downey Jr.'s performance in this is spectacular. There's nothing in this film to me that detracts from it, and its place is solidified as easily one of the top 3 most important movies in the MCU, no matter what, because it is the icebreaker. If this movie flops, we don't get anything else.
Yeah,
and
good point.
You know, so this film is an historic film for many a reason.
Lacey, same question.
You know, in the first 5 minutes of the film, I was like, okay, this is going to be, and then there's a little flashback, and you have this section where it's all like war, right? You know, it's in the caves and all, and I kind of was sitting there going, okay, if this lasts too much longer, they've lost me, because I'm not a war movie person. I don't do sad, right? We all know Lacey doesn't like drama. But within the first 21 minutes, like the second he stepped out of the cave and said, "My turn," I was like, oh, yes, please. Thank you. I'm in. And ever since then, it's been full steam ahead. Yeah, absolutely.
I know what you mean. Yeah, I was wondering, like, how long are these cave scenes going to go? You know, and I like the twist that we got where in the beginning you see the attack happen, and then you're taken back only 36 hours. So you're like, wow, how is he going to get from here to there in 36 hours? And a lot happens, which is great. However, for me, over the years, I've come to a conclusion that I prefer the first half to the second half. I'm not a big fan of the Obadiah Stain standoff and the fight and all that kind of stuff. I actually prefer the scenes with Pepper Potts, you know, and the tension scene up until where she's like getting the information from the computer and Obadiah comes up and she does that little sneaky little thing with a thumb drive, and then she meets up with Coulson finally. But it's for me, comparing it to other stuff, I really enjoy the first half a lot more than the second half. And because I've seen this movie so many times, the only thing that I stay around for is the end and the end credit scene. But the end when he goes, "I am Iron Man." I love that scene so much. But the big bad battle stuff, it to me doesn't really hold up as well as it used to. Anyway, my thoughts. Now, Kyle, you said money. This movie had a budget of $140 million estimate. Opening weekend in the U.S. was a little over $98 million. U.S. gross in Canada was $319 million, but worldwide $585 million in plus change, which was a really good showing for a movie that they took a chance on to do and realized, you know what? I think we can do better. And we did when it came to money. Do you guys remember getting it on home video and media? Film was released by Paramount Home Media Distribution on DVD and Blu-ray September 30th, 2008. The DVD sales were very successful, selling over 4 million copies the first week and generating a gross of an extra $93 million. There was a total of 9 million copies sold and accumulated a total sales of over $160 million, not including Blu-ray. Did you guys buy this immediately on home video, Lacey?
Yes. Remember back when we did Last Starfighter and I said I have a list of movies that I use to test out any sound system?
Yes.
There you go. Iron Man is. You once asked me what the other ones were, and I was like, "Oh, I'm sure you'll find out along the way."
Is there a particular scene that you turn to, or do you just do it from the beginning?
There are particular scenes that I want to hear specifically, but I'm not a skip to the middle kind of gal. Like if I'm going to sit down and watch a movie, I don't just sit down and watch a clip. That's what I had film school for. Now I watch the full movie beginning to end. Yeah.
Gotcha. Kyle, did you go out and buy that Blu-ray or DVD?
Oh, I was Blu-ray all the way. I know if you're going to test sound, though, there's only one scene. And that's when Tony demonstrates the Jericho rocket. And he turns around and the explosion behind him. That is the scene for testing your sound and testing your visual.
Some say the best weapon is one you never fire. I disagree. I think the best weapon is the one you get to fire once. And there's nothing cooler than like having a bunch of explosions behind you, you know, and then he kind of like gets blown forward a little bit. It's great. There's I remember seeing this. I think it was DVD for me. I didn't upgrade to Blu-ray till maybe a few years later. So I got the original DVD at the time. Film was also collected in a 10-disc box set titled Marvel Cinematic Universe Phase 1. I remember that one. That one came out in 2013, and that was a big box. So
I have the briefcase.
Oh, you have the briefcase? Oh, yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah, it's got the Tesseract in it and all the files on everybody. And
was that the one that was based on the Iron Man 2 like suit in the case thing? Was that what that was?
It was designed to look like the case with the Tesseract in it. Wilson's
gotcha.
The silver briefcase. Yeah,
that is so cool.
Mm-hmm.
This movie had good critical response. Rotten Tomatoes reported a 94% approval rating of this, with this consensus reading. Powered by Robert Downey Jr.'s vibrant charm, Iron Man turbocharges the superhero genre with a deft intelligence and infectious sense of fun. CinemaScore gave the film an average of an A. Robert Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times gave the film 4 out of 4 stars, praising Downey's performance and stating, quote, "At the end of the day, it's Robert Downey Jr. who powers the liftoff, separating from his most other superhero movies," or this from other superhero movies. I want to chat on that real quick, guys. Robert Downey Jr., is he the perfect cast for this?
Oh yeah,
Lacey.
No doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if it had been, I think that his ability to work with Jon Favreau is what put it together properly. I don't think that it might not have worked if it hadn't been the two of them together.
Yeah.
If either one of them had been replaced by someone else, I just don't think that it would have been what it was.
Kyle?
Oh, most definitely. I mean, when I heard he was cast for the role, knowing what I know from the comics, I was like, this is perfect casting. He gets what's going on with Tony Stark because he understands the demons that Tony Stark has. And when I think back to 2008, I can't think of another actor at that time who could have been put in this role and pulled this off absolutely perfectly, because he made Tony Stark. You could empathize with Tony Stark, but you still wanted to be Tony Stark. He made Tony Stark cool but relatable in a way, because we could see his cool side, but we could see his demons haunting him.
And we're gonna touch on I think some other casting, possibilities, but he was perfectly cast in this, and I'm glad John fought for Robert on this, because I think that there was some pushback on that. So Todd McCarthy of Variety called the film an expansively entertaining special effects extravaganza with fresh energy and stylistic polish. Kirk Honeycutt of the Hollywood Reporter kind of feels the way I do right now, though. Praised the film while nothing less finding disappointment in the climactic battle between different Iron Man prototypes. How did Tony's nemesis learn how to use the suit? Okay, guys, I got to ask you real quick. Do you see my problem with this film? Do you agree or disagree? Lacey?
I don't think that it's the problems. I don't have a problem with the fact that he took 12 seconds to learn how to maneuver the suit. I have a problem with the fact that the suit that he had would have been physically impossible for him to move because it was so large. I mean, mechanics notwithstanding, I was just kind of like, oh, okay. Well,
outside of the mechanics of learning how to use it,
right?
What are your thoughts on my issue of, I think the end battle scene is kind of lackluster. That was my opinion. It doesn't hold up well, in my opinion.
You know what? I think that the final battle with Stain was a culmination of it wasn't the same type of bad guy. I mean, you're talking about a businessman who has reasons that are business related to get rid of Tony Stark. And he goes, oh, wait, there's a thing I can get in and beat the crap out of him, and this is the only way I can win.
I like the idea that it was someone who was a surrogate father figure, and he had to learn from that, and this guy who was basically doing nefarious stuff. And I like the idea. I just didn't like the way it was executed. Kyle, do you disagree?
So this is where we get into a little bit of the comic side of things, because the battle with Obadiah Stain was a pretty big storyline in Iron Man comics from about issue 180 to 200, climaxing with a major fight between Iron Man and Tony Stark and Obadiah Stain in what they call the Ironmonger suit. Now, in the comics, Tony Stark was just coming back from his alcoholism, giving up the Iron Man suit to Jim Rhodes in the comics, and Tony Stark had just taken back with a whole new set of armor that they call the Silver Centurion armor. One of the things that I think this would have been this is a line that should have been put in this film, I think, to clear up for somebody like you, Kevin. In the comics, they make the point that Stain piloted the Ironmonger suit in every test of it. He wouldn't allow anybody else to pilot it. As far as the movement and stuff like that goes, a lot of mechanics, a lot of AI there, Lacey. So that's where some of that comes in. But let's not forget, Stain is not just a businessman. He's a scientist. He in his own way. So he knows weapons, and he was up to nefarious stuff outside of just fighting Tony. He was weapons dealing and things like that. So Stain's got some ability and some skills. And again, with the fact that you're thinking about when you're designing the Ironmonger suit, you're designing it to put a soldier in there, and it doesn't necessarily have to be as trained or as scientific as the Iron Man suit, which Tony made for him.
So did you like it then? That's what I'm getting at. Did you like it?
I liked it. I liked how they executed the Ironmonger suit. I agree with you that in the aspect of it, it's probably one of the more lackluster climax battles in the MCU. But I also chalk that up to they were just learning how to really do those kind of battles.
That's true. That's true.
They were still working on the formula at that point too. And I don't think Iron Man is about that big climactic battle. I think there's a lot more to Iron Man than that battle. So that's kind of where I'm at.
I appreciate the callback to the comics, though, for those of us that haven't read the comics like myself. So I do appreciate that and have a little more idea about it, because I can totally see the way you were describing it in the comics of how that was a big deal in the comics then. And so they were trying to kind of replicate that. So, okay, guys, without cheating, without clicking on Jon Favreau's link here, he's the director. Little fun here. You know that when you click on an actor or director's IMDb link, don't do it yet. There's always 4 films that pop up. What do you think that he is known for in those 4 films? Lacey, if you had to take a guess.
Films only or including television?
It's films. I'll tell you that right now. He has 4 films that have popped up that he is known for. It's always a top 4 for every
I'm going to go with Rudy, Iron Man, maybe Mowgli.
One more.
Maybe one of the Spider-Men or one of the Avengers potentially.
Okay, you got 2. You got Iron Man and Avengers Endgame. I'll give it to you. Kyle, what do you think the other 2 are?
Rudy's not on there. That's crazy. Go ahead. Sorry.
Chef.
Did you cheat?
No, I didn't look. I like Chef. But it's a great film.
Okay, what's the other one?
The live-action Lion King.
No. Swingers.
Okay, yeah.
It's Chef, Iron Man, Swingers, and Avengers Endgame that pop up for his 4. But I'm glad you mentioned Chef first, Kyle. Maybe you're thinking on the same thing, because I absolutely love that film. He stars in that as an opinionated chef, and he gets fired from his job, and he has his Iron Man friends to back him up. Robert Downey has a cameo in that. Scarlett Johansson has a cameo in that. And I love that film, and it makes me hungry every time I watch that film. Have you seen it, Lacey?
I love it. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
I have the Blu-ray and everything.
We all love Jon Favreau, especially now he's more involved in the Star Wars universe, bringing us The Mandalorian and being involved in the Book of Boba Fett. And we hope that he continues in the Star Wars world. He is awesome.
Dude, are we ready to say that this is probably the first time people realize that he can do no wrong?
Like, you know what? This one definitely gave him clout, and that's actually a good question to bring up there, Lacey, because when I look at his IMDb, I remember him doing Zathura. I remember him doing Elf. He did Elf in, 2007? He did it before Iron Man, if I remember correctly. But I'm just going to look at directing right now. He's obviously done a lot of acting, but let's look at this. So he does Elf in 2003, excuse me. I'm looking at movies right now.
Peter Billingsley, who is the cinematographer. Yep.
Zathura, Iron Man in 2008, Iron Man 2 in 2010. Okay. Cowboys and Aliens in 2011. Jumping up, he does some TV stuff. Chef in 2014. The Jungle Book in 2016 is where I think he probably got his real big Disney clout, because it was a successful film. Kyle, where do you think that, like, oh, this guy's a director, he needs to get behind the camera more? Is it Iron Man?
Iron Man on both fronts makes Jon Favreau a household name. Period. People knew him. He was kind of one of those that guy actors.
Plus, he's happy. He's in the freaking movie.
Yeah, but what I'm saying though is, I think before Iron Man, Jon Favreau as an actor is one of those. Oh, it's that guy. Like, you knew his face, but you maybe didn't know his name. But he was in so much. Yeah. You know, I mean, if you're a big fan of Swing,
I'll give you the caveat: unless you lived in California. If you lived in California, you knew Swingers. You knew this kid had something, and he was going to go places.
Well, but I think I'm talking just on a worldwide scale, because Iron Man was so huge. It's a superhero movie. Mm-hmm. It's something nobody thought could even be pulled off, and he pulled it off. Mm-hmm. And you know, that's why he is the founding father of the MCU. And it's not Kevin Feige, it's not Josh Whedon, it is Jon Favreau. Jon Favreau is the founding father of the MCU, and this put him on a international scale level. And he was also the man that brought back Robert Downey Jr.'s career. Yeah.
So, you know, it's interesting too, and I think it was a smart move. I know it wasn't his first choice, but he decided to jump in to play the happy role, and I think it was a smart move that he was able to stay in front of the camera of the MCU, yet still also be behind it and be a producer as well. So, but we were talking about, you know, who else could have played or who was considered for playing Iron Man if it's not Robert Downey Jr., which A-list actors were almost in Iron Man. He single-handedly launched the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Robert Downey Jr. almost didn't play Iron Man. Nicolas Cage was considered back in 1996. Kyle.
Okay, there wasn't a superhero movie in the 90s that Nick Cage wasn't considered for the lead. I think he might have even been considered the lead for Blade. I'm just saying.
Yeah, well, he was at the top of his game with all the action films that he was doing. He was at his apex in the 90s. So yeah, his name was always being thrown around there. Tom Cruise. Sorry, go ahead, Lacey.
Didn't he give up the idea? Like, didn't he at first refuse the meeting or something because he was still holding out to do that, like the Superman version? He wanted to do the Superman one really, really bad. Holding out for it.
Yeah. Well, Tom Cruise showed interest a few years later and commissioned his own script.
Kevin,
what? Yeah,
I have some Tom Cruise trivia for you on that.
Oh,
okay.
If the rumors are true, Tom Cruise will be Tony Stark.
Oh, they're saying he might come back in one of the multiverses?
There is a very strong rumor he is going to have a cameo as an alternate Tony Stark in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. And there is a precedent for he would be actually really good casting for the version of Tony Stark they are talking about using.
He would. So. I think he would. If they did the multiverse Tony, that would be great. But once Jon Favreau was attached as director, he offered Iron Man to Hugh Jackman. Jon also considered Clive Owen and Sam Rockwell, but Sam was cast as Hammer in Iron Man 2, a role Al Pacino was up for. However, after seeing Robert Downey Jr. in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, Jon Favreau, the actor, to audition on the same day Jon was auditioning Timothy Olyphant. Jon Favreau, through Robert's personal Rocky history and how it played out in the press, would lend well to Tony Stark's character and cast him instead. For Pepper Potts, Jon Favreau offered the role to Rachel McAdams originally. Greg Clark's portrayal of Agent Coulson was so good his part was expanded, and Terrence Howard was the first cast and was the highest paid actor in Iron Man.
We'll get to that.
Yes, we will get to that. But let's talk about the cast itself, guys. Of course, we got Jeff Bridges as Obadiah Stain, Gwyneth as Pepper, Leslie Bibb as Christine Everhart. We got Shaun Toub as Yinsen. Greg Clark, of course, as Agent Coulson.
Clark Gregg.
I'm sorry. Clark Gregg, yes. Paul Bettany is the voice of Jarvis. We'll see where that goes. Peter Billingsley as William Ginter Riva. And who else do we have here? We'll talk about Stan Lee and Samuel Jackson a little bit later, but I want to ask you guys on the other casting of this. Lacey, start with you, please.
I really liked Leslie Bibb in her role, and I love the fact that they kept kind of bringing her back here and there throughout the rest of the series. I really like that they didn't go with Sam Rockwell. I think he was so good as Hammer, and I don't think it would have been the same. Like he's like, they're both fantastic. I just think he's a different type of fantastic than Robert Downey Jr. There's a difference in their types of humor, and I don't know that he would have pulled it off the same way.
Trust me, we talked about this on True Believers. Kyle and I want Hammer to come back in some way, fashion. We love him. We love him. So, what about the rest of the cast?
And he and Leslie Bibb are together in real life. Like they're cool. Married or something. I don't know if they're whatever. But
did they meet on Iron Man 2? Is that what the deal was? Or
no? I think she recommended. I think when he auditioned or something, and then he recommended her for a part, or she brought him in, one or the other.
Gotcha.
But as far as, I think, honestly, y'all are gonna laugh. I really loved Jeff. I'm a Bridges man. Like, when it comes to this, he was just so good at doing that very calm, collected. He's just when they're on the steps and he's doing the photo op and he says, "Who do you think I'm the one who
put the injunction on him?"
Right? Yeah. Just the smile, like that, just that hint of a smile, and I was like, oh, he's so evil. Like, he's just so evil. Like, he's just so good at that understated bad guy, like bringing like super creep factor. He's really good at that. I liked
and he had a great look to him as well. Kyle, do you have any thoughts on any of the cast members?
Okay, well, first let's start with Jeff Bridges here, because this was also the kind of a bit of a start of the Jeff Bridges resurgence too, because it was shortly after this. If you look at some of his roles, he brings Tron Legacy in 2010. He did Crazy Heart, which he got a lot of credit for.
He did that right after Iron Man in 2009. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Got
this kind
Oscar
of started a Jeff Bridges kind of renaissance in some aspect as well.
True Grit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably most surprised by Gwyneth Paltrow. I was not a Gwyneth Paltrow fan going into this film, and I was like, she was kind of the aspect of, I don't know about this, and she is just phenomenal as Pepper Potts, and she turned me around on her in playing Pepper Potts without any question at all. I'm with you on Leslie Bibb too. I think she's a lot of fun in this. Terrence Howard, that's a whole separate conversation I think we need to have at one point here before this podcast is over. And I got to throw love to Clark Gregg, because the guy, if Robert Downey Jr. is the man who brought us to Marvel Universe, Clark Gregg was the heart and the glue of Phase 1 of the MCU. And and he was just absolutely phenomenal in those in that role of Agent Coulson. And of course too, I got to show just some quick love. Paul Bettany as Jarvis was great, and how he played off of Robert Downey Jr. as Jarvis was phenomenal.
I'm with you on the Gwyneth Paltrow thing. There was a couple things I've seen her in. She was charming, and there's some things I was just like, whatever. She really surprised me in this film, and I have come to really like her as Pepper Potts, and I love the chemistry that she and Robert Downey Jr. have, and there's some of my favorite scenes, to be perfectly honest with you. When it comes to I think that we should probably talk about him now. I do want to make a comment real quick on Leslie Bibb as Christine Everhart. I like the fact that, yes, she falls for Tony and they have sex. But I like the fact that she's the one that confronts him in the reality of what his arms are doing with those pictures at the party. Yeah. And I love the fact that we see her later on, but I love the fact they just didn't kind of write her off as just like another bimbo that he sleeps with, that she actually, does work. And it's him in those pictures that really kind of trigger him into wanting to do something in Gomera. But Kyle, let's talk about Terrence Howard now. What are your thoughts?
Okay. He always felt a little off in the Rhodey character to me. I understand why he was cast. He was huge at the time. He was one of the it men in Hollywood. And realistically, he should have been probably the highest paid actor going into this film when you look at where the star rankings were at the time. Robert Downey Jr. was still kind of proving himself again. So one of the biggest blown opportunities in Hollywood history. I think his ego destroyed him and did him no service, because not only does he demand the same, if not more money for Iron Man 2 than what Robert Downey Jr. is making, by that point it's clear Robert Downey Jr. is the star of the franchise and back. Did he not read any of the comics to know what the future was for Rhodey? I mean, it's just mind blowing. How do you blow this opportunity? And I mean, it just Don Cheadle is great as Rhodey. There are times I wonder what would Terrence Howard have done with this if he would have stuck around for the whole time. But
Lacey, before you get your opinion on this, I just want to mention Kyle. That begs the question, because he was and I'll tell you how much Robert Downey Jr. was paid, because I want to go into this a little bit. He was paid $500,000 for this film. So Terrence was paid more than that. I don't know what that is, but he was obviously one of the biggest names. But after Iron Man, he does Fighting, Princess and the Frog as a voice. He does a stint on Sesame Street, I guess. He does Ghost of New Orleans, The Ledge. Then he gets into Law and Order. He does Red Tails in 2012. And I'm looking at like movies that stand out that were big. He just does all these little kind of smaller films and stuff like that. It didn't really take off for him. He's a great actor. I've seen him in great stuff. I Hustle and Flow, loved him in Four Brothers, as Lieutenant Green. But you're right. I think that this could have really, if he had come back and he didn't ask for a pay raise or want more money, I think that he could have probably parlayed this into even maybe bigger roles, unless that's not what he wanted. Lacey?
First of all, I love him as Rhodey. I wish that he had. I wish that he had stayed. Don't get me wrong. I love Don Cheadle. He's amazing. He's fantastic. I prefer Rhodey as Terrence Howard. Also, just if you're happening to be walking through a hotel lobby in Atlanta, he is better looking in person. I walked onto an elevator as he was getting off, and I was just like, "Oh my goodness, he is better looking in person." Anyway,
he's a good looking guy. Yeah,
his eye, like he made eye contact with me, and he could have asked me to rob a bank. I would have been like, "Yep, let's go."
Do you need to be alone for a few minutes, Lacey?
Yeah, but, I think that the biggest problem with what happened was that he didn't just go into negotiations and try and talk his way into, or having his agent go in and talk. He put the laundry on the front porch. He put everything in the news. He did interviews. He went on Twitter and all these things and started talking about how they weren't treating him properly. And then I can't remember, but I don't know if he did it or if someone else did it on his behalf, but someone pulled the race card and started saying that, like, he's the only person in the, well, it was, and I don't know, I don't remember that far back as far as the specifics of what was said, but I think that a lot of the reason that he's doing a lot of those smaller movies is because a lot of people might not have wanted to get close to him for a minute or two, because it got real out there in the media, and it was not a happy, positive, fun time.
One more point you want to make, Kyle?
I think really what happened with Terrence Howard, whether it was his handlers, himself, I think it's a bit of everything, because I do think his ego played a role in this. He made himself toxic from this situation, and nobody was really going to touch him. I want to throw out real quick somebody we hadn't talked about too, Kevin. Mm-hmm. If we don't talk about it, they'll give a shout out at least to Shaun Toub as Jensen, because without him in this film and him playing that role so well, it doesn't pull off.
And the fact that we get him back later on in Iron Man 3 flashback, I think is great.
Yeah. Who are we talking about?
Yeah, Shaun Toub, who played Jensen. He
was the prisoner with him inside the cave.
Yosef.
Yes, Yosef, that's right.
Okay, I'm sorry, I was confused. Okay, yes, thank you. I didn't know the actor's name, so I was trying to. Okay, good. Yes.
Yeah, Yosef Jensen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
He's definitely. Well, here's what happens when you stick with the franchise and you come back for more sequels. I want to talk about how much money Robert Downey Jr. has made within the franchise here. He was paid $500,000 for this film. Iron Man 2, he made more profit and earned $10 million. 2012 movie The Avengers, Downey's third film playing the billionaire, he was given a paycheck of $10 million for the project, but the back-end deals brought his total to an income of $50 million. Jack Nicholson, 89 Batman, anyone? The third movie in the Iron Man franchise was released in 2013 and earned him another $10 million. The back-end deals, however, gave him another $50 million. The second movie in the Avengers series, Avengers Age of Ultron, paid Downey between $50 to $80 million, despite being the lowest grossing film in the franchise. Downey earned a total of nearly $64 million for Captain America Civil War and between $10 million to $15 million for his short role as Tony Stark in Spider-Man Homecoming. For Infinity War, the first film in the two-part finale of the MCU's first phase, the actor earned at least $75 million. And the film where Downey played the role of the genius businessman for the first time in Avengers Endgame earned him another $75 million, and according to IGN, bringing his Marvel movie earnings to around $400 million. Cha-ching! And you need him, Kyle. You need him.
You need him. He's the heart of the MCU without a doubt. But I want to bring up this point. He never changed. He respected the MCU. He respected the fans. And to this day, still does things as Tony Stark, even though he does try to distance himself from the character somewhat. He knows where his bread was buttered, and he respects it, and he respects everybody involved with it. And I think it's as just as important to him. And I think if they asked him to come back in some kind of fashion, he would never say no to coming back to the MCU. And that's what I love about that, is that even though he made $400 million, he stayed true to it the entire time. He was never there just for the paycheck.
Yeah, and he did a lot of charity work too, which was great. And Lacey, I wanted to get your comments on the longevity of and how important keeping Robert in this universe was.
Well, the nice thing was, I mean, you had Iron Man, then you had, what was after Iron Man? What was the next film?
Iron Man 2.
Did that go back to back?
I think was Thor. I thought Thor was between the two Iron Mans. Maybe I'm mistaken.
I don't have that in front of me, but it was
Okay.
Iron Man and Iron Man 2. Yeah.
Well, then that changes my statement. I was going to say that, you had Hulk beforehand and then him, and then I thought it was going to be Thor. And so you had the idea that you've got the three individuals.
Was it?
And then you could
it was Hulk. It was Hulk between Iron Man and Iron Man 2.
Okay.
Right.
Well,
that's right. Yeah, you're right.
That doesn't help my argument because that Hulk didn't do very well. But I think that keeping him in the role is there's a continuity of care that Marvel has taken that the other guys have not. Every 4 movies you get a new Batman, you got a new Superman, you got the other guys they kind of redo things over and over again. I know that with Spider-Man it's been rebooted several times, but within the MCU, for the what are we at, 26 movies now?
Yeah, I think more than that even.
Yeah, now more than that.
I think that No Way Home is 26. And then if you add, because that retroactively brings in 5 other Spider-Man movies, I think that the continuity is important, and I think that keeping everyone in the same roles is worth it.
Well, regarding just looking ahead real quick, we're going to be doing Iron Man and then Iron Man 2 because of the continuity wise, and then we're going to do the Hulk movie after that because the cameo that Tony Stark has in that film is more of an established Tony, and it's I know it's probably different elsewhere, but in our rewatch we're going to do the Hulk after Iron Man 2 and do it that way. So. Cool. All right, guys, let's go ahead and head into phase 2. Our favorite scenes and moments. Kyle, what are some of your favorite scenes and moments in Iron Man?
Honestly, the first moment of the film when we're seeing Tony Stark for the first time, and you're watching Robert Downey Jr. play Tony Stark, and if you're a fan of the comics or even you just know they've nailed this. They got the most important part of this right. I think some of the other favorite scenes for me too are, I love the scene where he's flying the suit for the first time and he comes across the F-15s.
Yeah.
And when he's gone to Gamora
and he's talking to Rhodey on the phone.
Yeah, and a great little Marvel Easter egg there. The ringtone on Rhodey's phone is the classic Iron Man cartoon theme song. So that's a great moment there. You know what? I think one of my all-time favorite scenes is when he's first building the armor and he's going through all the testing with Dummy and all of them, and Jarvis's help, and I can fly. Yeah. I mean,
Lacey, what are your favorite?
So good.
Lacey, what are your favorite scenes and moments?
I think that as far as I think Yusuf had some really great moments. I feel like the beginning of Iron Man and his change from that, you only see him being like the jerk in that one first scene, right? A little bit of flashback or whatever, like being that kind of like full of himself guy. The conversations that he had with Yusuf, I love the conversation where Yusuf says, well, this is an important week for you. He says, if you don't get out of here, that if you leave without that magnet, you're dead in a week. And then also when they're talking about family, and he says, so you're the man who has everything and nothing. Yeah. And I think those two statements right there made him Iron Man, like mentally. I think that emotional statement, right, and those conversations, I think those two statements are what brought us Iron Man. So that's some of my favorites. As far as like fun stuff, I love it when Pepper says that she occasionally has to take out the trash. That's fantastic. That one little interaction made her the perfect Pepper Potts. Like nothing that happens after this is that's the perfect spot. I agree with Kyle with all the testing. My favorite is when he says, okay, 10% thrusters. And he flies up and smacks into the ceiling and then hits the floor. That's fantastic. We also have a couple of little bits and pieces where the 10 rings are mentioned several times.
It's in the banner behind him when they're doing the
right?
video of him inside the cave. Yeah.
Yes, it's behind, but it's actually spoken twice. Like he actually says, with the 10 rings, I represent the 10 rings two different times. Also, there's a point where Jarvis says, perhaps if you plan to visit other planets, we'll have to rework. And so that now going back and rewatching, you're like, oh, hey, okay, somebody put a little something in there for that. And the my turn when he walks out of the cave,
right?
There's that. It's a series of it's like a sequence where from the time where the computer goes down and it goes all black except for the blue of the computer screen, and the sound goes down with it.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose, and then the sound goes down again, and you see the actual physical camera shake as he walks out of the cave for the first time. And that right there was when I started realizing what sound editing can do for film. It's amazing.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because when I was at the Avengers, what do they call it? The Avengers. It's not Academy. That's the one in Disneyland, LA. The Avengers It's the Avengers thing that's at Treasure Island in Las Vegas, where it's like a walking museum you go through and you get to see all the different Iron Man suits.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, it's really cool. And what's funny is when I was doing that, and my favorite Iron Man suit is Iron Man 2 suit that's in the suitcase. I just love that. So cool. And they have that one there. But when I got to
27, right?
Yeah, something like that.
27 or something. Yeah.
When I got down to the Mark 1, the cave version one, I actually was feeling very nostalgic for it, even though I didn't really care for it at the time when I first saw it. Or as the other ones are coming out, I like those more, but I thought that was really cool. For me, real quick, the scenes that I really kind of gravitated to recently when I was doing the rewatch is all the stuff in the beginning where he is jerk Tony, and he's got the slicked hair and the red glasses, and he specifically, it has like a different look, I love that. But I like the scene after he's realizing he has to change, like after the cave scene when he gets rescued. I love the fact that he's like, nope, I want a press conference right now, but cheeseburgers first. And I love how we get the reference to the cheeseburgers later, but I love the fact that he's eating one, he pulls one out of the bag as he's getting out of the car, and then he goes and then he has like one in his pocket, which might have been the same. And the whole press conference is great. I like that as well. But the other scenes that I really like that are kind of back to back, when everything where Obadiah Stain saying that they're turning on you, the injunction, everything like that. But I like the scene where he upgrades his artificial heart thing, and he has Pepper Potts pull out the old one. I love that scene so much, because that's when he says, I don't have anyone. It's you. That's all I have right now. And I love how there's foreshadowing there, because he needs that older piece later to survive. And I love the party scene, because they're having this party and he's like, wait, where's my invite? Maybe I should be there, and he just shows up. They weren't expecting him. And there's that scene with Aderhold too, and he's very uncomfortable. But then you start seeing the early sparks between him and Pepper, and I absolutely love that. I think that's great. So those are my favorite scenes there.
And I do like the fact that
go ahead, Lacey.
That comes back later when she turns around and she says, you're all I've got too. Like that. Then there's a nice duality there that is somewhat reminiscent of I love you.
She knows it. She knows his social security number, and he doesn't. So I think that was funny.
Right.
That's I think that's some love right there. Anyway.
Yeah. So.
Trivia, guys. According to Jon Favreau, when making this film, there's a lot of pressure for it to succeed. This was particularly due to Marvel using their characters as collateral when they received a $525 million 7-year deal called a non-recourse debt facility, allowing them to make original films based on their properties. Marvel wanted to have complete creative control over their characters, build a film library, and greater profit potential when the deals they've inked with other studios owning the film rights to their characters. Marvel also changed its name to Marvel Entertainment Incorporated to establish a Hollywood presence. If the film didn't succeed, Marvel would have lost the intellectual property rights to their library. However, the wager paid off as Iron Man's box office success enabled Marvel to kick off an entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. Kyle.
There's a lot of importance to that piece of trivia because it wasn't that long before this movie was made. Marvel went to bankruptcy. Marvel Comics went to bankruptcy. They had tried to do their own distribution called Heroes World. It didn't work, and Marvel was in a very bad spot. And the reason why, and a lot of people know this, but the reason why they chose Iron Man was because they didn't have the movie rights to X-Men. They didn't have the movie rights to Spider-Man. So it was like, who do we go with? They felt like Iron Man was the film that they could actually kind of pull off in a modern time and not come across as incredibly corny compared to like a Captain America or Thor at the time.
Good point. Yeah, a great point.
Well, and if you look at the previous iterations of Captain America and Thor, they hadn't gone very well.
Yeah.
Like just the TV movies that they had done, they're kind of looking at some of those older stuff going like, well, that wasn't received too well. And who else we have in the list? Files.
Jon Favreau celebrated getting the job as director by going on a diet and losing 70 pounds. And the script was not completely finished when filming began, since the filmmakers were more focused on the story and the action. So the dialogue was mostly ad-libbed throughout filming. Favreau acknowledged. Did not
like.
What's that, Lacey?
Which Jeff Bridges did not like.
Yes, I've got that on there.
Oh, really?
Yes, I do. Jon Favreau acknowledged this film that this made the film feel more natural. Some scenes were shot with 2 cameras to capture lines improvised on the spot. Jeff Bridges says he was very uncomfortable not having a script or rehearsals, since normally he is very prepared and knows his lines word for word. Realizing it was like he was in a $200 million student film took the pressure off him and made it fun. I Am Iron Man was ad-libbed by Robert Downey Jr. Producer Kevin Feige approved using it in the final cut of the film and credits this with his decision to largely do away with secret identities in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Only Spider-Man conceals his identity, while Thor's alter ego Donald Blake is similarly not amused. Kyle, what's that reference to?
Well,
do you know, or are you just kind of making stuff up right now?
No, I'm not making stuff up yet.
Donald Blake.
The reason why they did this is because, Tony Stark was the one character in comics where they've always felt like, really, the bodyguard. That was always a secret identity. Iron Man was Tony Stark's bodyguard. That was, and it's like,
okay.
Never made sense.
All
and
right.
So they decided, well, let's throw it out there, and it kind of worked. It works. The only character really to maintain the secret identity that it really does work for Spider-Man, because it's so important to that character's establishment. So
gotcha. According to Paul Bettany, he did not know which film he was working. He merely did the job as a favor to Jon Favreau, to whom he worked with in one of my favorite films, Wimbledon, which came out in 2004. Kyle, you're a big fan of that one as well. Lacey, do you like Wimbledon?
Loved Wimbledon. Yeah.
Yeah, Jon Favreau played the agent. He's like, he's like, where's my agent been? He's like, well, you haven't really been relevant for a while, and now you're relevant. I love that. I love that. Such an.
There's also the Bettany link. He and his wife. His wife was Jennifer Connelly, was in Hulk.
Yeah. Yep. Paul Bettany had never seen the film and was unfamiliar with the plot. He said Jarvis was the easiest job ever. It was almost like a robbery, since he only worked for 2 hours, got paid a lot of money, and went on a vacation with his wife, Jennifer, who would later, of course, voice the AI in Spider-Man Homecoming as well. And we all know what happened with Jarvis later on. So this was interesting. To avoid spoilers about the final press conference, the I Am Iron Man, the extras were told that it was a dream sequence. Very clever. Very clever. All right. The Roadster on which Tony Stark was working on is owned by director Jon Favreau. Perks, would you say, of being the director?
Yeah, you think?
And this is just kind of weird. I thought this was funny. The actor who asked Tony what happened in Afghanistan at the press conference is Billie Eilish's father, singer Billie Eilish. It's her father. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Cool.
And this was the last film special effects expert Stan Winston completed before his death. All right, guys. I got to touch briefly on the soundtrack here. Iron Man, his movies have had a very good soundtrack record, especially for us metalheads here. And Jon Favreau advised his composer Ramin Djawadi to keep the score of his music on heavy guitar, which he felt suited Iron Man best. Composer of the music on the heavy guitar before arranging it to the orchestra to perform, and rock guitarist Tom Morello assisted Ramin in composing the film's soundtrack. Morello had a cameo in the film as a security guard who gets killed by the Ironmonger, since Morello is a member of the band Rage Against the Machine. Kyle?
I just want to throw in, because Raim has become like one of the go-to guys for soundtracks in Hollywood. One of my favorite pieces of work he did the soundtrack score for Pacific Rim.
Ah, yes. He's also done Game of Thrones as well and Westworld. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. He's got some cool stuff behind his thing there. But, we know Iron Man Stark loves his metal. We've got Back in Black by AC/DC. Of course, classic Iron Man by Black Sabbath. We've got Suicidal Tendencies in this as well. It has a great soundtrack, and I'm a big fan of that. Any comments on the soundtrack, guys?
The use of AC/DC, just as a band that Tony Stark loves, just fits so well, because not only obviously when they use it in here, but when they use it to bring him in for the first time in Avengers as well.
Yes. Yeah.
It's one of the great moments.
I love it. This is the music that I liked in high school, and musically my tastes have not changed since then.
Gotcha.
So
what's funny about AC/DC, for those of you that are fans of AC/DC like I am, they don't do greatest hit albums. They don't. They never have. They only release their albums, or they'll re-release their classic albums. So what's funny, I'll just mention this, and I'll talk about it more in the Iron Man 2 True Believers rewatch, is Iron Man 2 soundtrack is the closest thing you will get to an AC/DC greatest hits, because they have several AC/DC songs on that album. It's fun. Very funny. We'll talk about that later, though. But before we go on, let's go ahead and take a break from our True Believers Marvel MCU discussion and let you know what other great podcasts are here on the Fandom Podcast Network. Thank you for listening. We hope you're enjoying this podcast. We'd like to continue to feed your ears by inviting you to listen to these other great shows on the Fandom Podcast Network. It starts with our flagship show, Culture Clash, discussing the latest in entertainment pop culture. Bloody Kings, Immortals Take Notice, our show covering the entire Highlander universe. Couch Potato Theaters, where we celebrate our favorite movies. Time Warp, the Fandom Flashback podcast discussing a year in movies and our favorite retro movie and TV pop culture topics. Good Evening, discussing all things Alfred Hitchcock. Union Federation, our Star Trek and Orville show. Hair Metal, the 80s and early 90s rock metal podcast. Type 40, our show covering the time-traveling Doctor Who universe with host Dan Hadley. Lethal Mullet, an 80s and 90s action film podcast with host Adam P. O'Brien. Also check out the Lethal Mullet Network for more great podcasts. What a Piece of Junk, a Star Wars podcast with hosts Scott, Derek, and Nathan. Making Treks, a Star Trek podcast, a deep dive into the final frontier with host Mark Newbold and Adam P. O'Brien. And check out our newest shows, The Fandom Show, our monthly Fandom Podcast Network live YouTube exclusive show about the month's hottest topics in fandom, and the FPN True Believers MCU podcast, discussing the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the related Marvel television and streaming MCU universe, including the connections to the original Marvel comics. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on several platforms. Please subscribe to the Fandom Podcast Network YouTube channel to receive notifications of new podcast episodes and live events. You can enjoy all of the Fandom Podcast Network audio podcasts on our master feed at fpnet.podbean.com. The Fandom Podcast Network is on all major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcast and iTunes. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on Facebook. You can email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. You can also find the Fandom Podcast Network on Instagram at Fandom Podcast Network and on Twitter at FanPod Network. Thank you for listening, and remember, respect others and enjoy your fandom. All right, welcome back to True Believers. This is episode 44. We are discussing Iron Man, the 2008 classic that started it all, and we're doing our Infinity Saga chronological timeline rewatch, and we're going to go into phase 3 here, guys. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into the plot analysis and the impact on the MCU. But one thing I always like to do, Kyle, and since we're doing the chronological rewatch, not the theatrical rewatch, we've already seen the Tesseract, and we have to have a Tesseract update, and I brought it with us here. Now that it's in the studio, I don't know what to do with it, but I have it here in my hand. If you're watching the video, you can see it. It's lit up. It's kind of vibrating a little bit. It's a little hot. But Kyle, where right now in Iron Man 2008, do you remember where the Tesseract actually is?
The Tesseract is at this point still in S.H.I.E.L.D. possession. They haven't even brought in Selwig yet to be doing some experiments on it. This is probably just some S.H.I.E.L.D. scientists kind of messing around with it, trying to recreate some Hydra-type weapons. Kevin, just going to tell you right now, that's not a good idea. For those of you on the audio side of things, Kevin might be trying to take a bite out of the Tesseract, and I'm just saying I don't think Pepto-Bismol can fix that.
But hey, the Flurkin did it. If the Flurkin can eat this thing, I could, right? Right, Lacey?
I have Flurkins. They're not, no.
I'm actually thinking that isn't, like, technically to anyone who's not in S.H.I.E.L.D., isn't it still inside the Flurkin at this point?
Not necessarily. We don't know that 100%.
We don't know when that actually.
Well, he coughed it up. He coughed it up at the end of the film.
Right.
He did cough it up at the end of Captain Marvel.
Yes.
Captain Marvel's already happened in the timeline.
Scene, so we don't know where in the timeline that was, right?
Because it was on his desk. 90s version of Samuel Jackson's character, Nick Fury. He coughed up. So yeah, it's okay. So it's somewhere there. Okay, that's good. We're going to be doing that. We're going to have a Tesseract update if it's not obvious in the film. And right now it's kind of murky, so I'm kind of curious about it. So
that makes sense because at the end of that one, he saw the word Avenger.
Yes.
At the end of this one, he says the Avengers Initiative. So I guess that makes sense that that's before. Yeah. Okay.
All right, Kyle, your Flurkins haven't copped up any Tesseract, have they?
They've copped up some stuff. I don't think it's any Tesseracts as of yet, but that could change.
All right, Kyle, give us a quick little analysis of this plot here and what in it that you think that ties, into the future of the MCU that's really, really important, and pull something from the comics here. You already talked about Obadiah Stain and the threat against Tony and the fight there. Are there anything else out of that as well?
This is where this movie gets a little complicated because when they make this movie, they're not sure what's going to happen. So there's a lot of things. They lay a few pieces here and there, but there's not a lot. The 10 Rings, obviously, with the hints of the Mandarin. Of course, at that time, I don't think even Jon Favreau had a complete idea where he was going to take that.
Well,
but
it's nice that he put it in there, but like when I was watching this for the first time, I'm not being a comic guy. That went right over my head.
Yeah, no, as soon as they said 10 Rings, a lot of, if you're a comic guy, you're thinking Mandarin instantly, things like that. There's really not a lot to make you go, huh, until we get to that stinger. And right. we'll talk about that when we talk about the stinger. But I mean, the plot itself, again, they pull so much from that run, like I said, from about issue 180 to 200 of Iron Man. That's just it's one of my favorite runs of Iron Man. And his confrontation where Obadiah Stane takes over Stark Industries. Stark goes to the Demon in the Bottle. You got the Demon in the Bottle storyline, and then his Stark's redemption, because there's a run. What happens in the comics is basically you have Demon in the Bottle where Tony Stark gives into his alcoholism, loses the company to Obadiah Stane. Jim Rhodes takes over as Iron Man for this time frame. And this is a good 5 or 6 years in comic printing because Jim Rhodes actually becomes an Avenger as Iron Man. He was Iron Man in the original Secret Wars miniseries. He was Iron Man when they founded the Avengers West Coast. So a lot of big things in comics was Jim Rhodes' Iron Man. Then Tony Stark comes back, and it's this huge comeback in the comics. So they took a lot of that Obadiah Stain drama and put that into the storyline, because I think felt like it was the most grounded yet still comic book based storyline they had to really work with Tony Stark there, and then things blow up from there. And I think it's one of those things where we're testing the grounds, and not only did the test work, it exploded.
Lacey, I wanted to get your opinion on this. Kyle obviously has a deep comic background, but obviously for obvious reasons, this movie has had a huge impact on the MCU. But is there something in this film that you look back on when you're watching the newer films and the stuff that maybe it references or not? Is there something that go, oh, I remember that in Iron Man, the original?
Okay. There's an important thing that you need to know about me, and that's that I used to work in film in continuity. So I'm that person that tells you when I read your script, I'm the person who tells you that you cannot do this on page 27 when you're going to do it again on page 96. So that's a story editing, and then
like a script supervisor type role as well. With that,
I've been both. I've done story editing as well as script supervising. So
gotcha.
Script supervision is on set telling you that you have to make sure that the cigarettes are all the same length and the levels of the water, and don't say that on this line. You have to pick up this, that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm always kind of in that frame of mind. But as far as it goes, like storyline wise, I think that there is so much invested with like internally in the MCU between, Kevin Feige and all the directors. When one person, gets assigned, hired to direct, they're automatically brought in on everything that's going to be happening beforehand. Even, James Gunn talked about how when he was hired for Guardians, they actually gave him the scripts to like the 3 previous films that still hadn't, they were in various, points of production and whatever. So there's a big continuity just within the company. I don't think a lot of people need to nitpick back. I don't think there's been a lot of retconning, back and forth, but I see each movie and I get nostalgic about the movies before. So a lot of times I'll go back and do a full rewatch before something comes out.
Interesting. I kind of fall with you there as well. It's like Kyle, we recently did a podcast on Union Federation where we're celebrating my friend Johnny K's fan film that he does for Star Trek.
Oh, cool.
And called Farragut Forward, and it's gotten me wanting to watch those 80s Star Trek films all back to back to back, because that's the time frame that takes place in.
Yeah.
Let me ask you guys this question then: timeline order versus release order. We're doing the timeline order. Most people keep going back and doing the release order. Which is a better impact for you when you rewatch this film? Would you rather see it in a release order now, or would you rather watch it in the timeline order, Kyle?
I think at this point, with most of the Marvel films, as far as going back and a rewatch, you probably would want to watch this in a timeline order, because I think they've really established that aspect. But as far as impact-wise, it's release order, because, again, there's no MCU without this. The impact to watch this, I think you can watch. This is one of the few films in the MCU you can really watch at any time without having to watch the other MCU films and just sit back and enjoy it. I think a lot of the Phase 1 films are kind of like that, but this one in particular, because it's the start. It's the start. And they had, you talk about continuity. They had no idea yet. They had ideas in the back of their mind, but they didn't know if they were even going to get the chance to get as far as they did with just to Avengers, much less what we have now. So I think impact, it's timeline. I think for rewatchability now, it's probably release order.
What about you, Lacey? The reason why I bring this question up, because for me personally, when I do the chronological, we start, of course, with Captain America, and then we go to Captain Marvel, because that's in the 90s. Knowing that Iron Man's coming up after 2 films I've already seen, I get that little extra excitement. What about you? What do you prefer when you do rewatch?
Okay, so this is what, if I recommend this based on the person I'm talking to. All right. I have a friend who maybe doesn't pay as much attention. Maybe she's on her phone a little bit. Maybe she wants to like play checkers while she, play like phone checkers while she's watching something. With that, I'm going to tell her to go Iron Man forward, right? Because that's the order that was released. It's something where there's enough callbacks here and there. And if she has a question, she's going to call me. Now, if I know someone is really interested in, the big picture,
right,
and they want to know every little detail, and I know that they're that person that's going to like pick up that little thing there and be like, I get, yes.
Then you tell them to do the chronological one.
Chronological direction. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great point you brought up, because I think that for the average fan doing the theatrical release, plus the theatrical release has a nostalgia for people as well. That's why they continue to watch it that way, because they remember being in the theater. They remember getting excited for the trailers that might tease something else coming later. So yeah.
I go a little step further though, and I actually cut movies in half in a couple of places, and I actually like have them do the one shots in certain spots, and I have like a list and the
smart, yeah,
all the stingers and all the codas, like I have those so if you do it the way that I recommend it, that way you're changing your discs out a lot more often.
This is true, yeah.
You're not,
well, Disney Plus has started to add some of these one shots to their repertoire. So if you want to try to go in there and do that, Kyle.
Yeah.
So what we're saying is,
yeah.
I was just gonna say is what we're saying is Disney Plus needs to create one MCU chronological stream that's everything cut in perfect order.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go. The super chronological cut. I like that. Okay, guys.
I even have them, like I do Captain America, then the first 10 minutes of Guardians, and then go back to, because you've got, that's the 80s. He's kidnapped in the 80s. So
yeah.
Then you have,
that's a deep cut. That's a deep cut. All right, guys, let's get into phase 4 here, our final phase here, where we start to close things out. But we got some stuff that we have to discuss first. This is where we have some critiques and changes. Do you have any critiques of this film, and would you alter anything, or something that you would have liked to have seen? Lacey, I'm going to go right back to you.
No, love it. Love the purse, love the shoes, love everything.
Kyle?
I think if they could go back and do one thing, I think with technology the way it is and what they can do now compared to then, I think they'd improve that final fight. I think they've done some other things with it, but they were still learning at the time, and the technology wasn't where it at. But otherwise, this movie is everything it needs to be for your induction into the MCU. And it's we look back at 2008 and go, we didn't think we'd ever see anything close to this level on screen in a superhero movie, and we got it, and it changed everything.
I agree. I would have maybe adjusted the final fight as well. I would have done a few things. And Kyle, what's one of my pet peeves in film?
In the dark, but they're getting a little bit better with that now.
You didn't explain it. I'll have to explain it. You didn't explain it well. You didn't explain it well.
Tell me.
Yeah, Kyle, you didn't explain it, man. Come on. My biggest pet peeve is big fight scenes that happen at night and in the dark, so they can spend less money and time on CG. That's one of my biggest pet peeves. And I remember the first one that really annoyed me was the Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, because I really liked the book, and that movie just sucked because of that reason. And I started to see it a lot more, but it would have been nice if this was a broad daylight fight. I know why it's night, because stuff lights up on the suits, and that makes sense and stuff like that. But I would have done a daylight fight there, just like they had been doing in Gomorrah and other places.
So you haven't liked Batman since 1989?
Batman 89 did not use a lot of CG. I'm talking about when it comes to CG work, heavy CG work in film.
All right. No, that's cool. I'm with you.
Yeah.
I mean, I get it. But wow,
if you can do it well in practical effects, that's good. But you'll notice that became a crutch a lot. A lot of CG fights will take place in low light in the dark. because
Yeah.
it's cheaper that you don't have to do the background work. And that's where I gave a lot of credit to the Transformer films, because a lot of those fights took place during the day and you would see a lot better. And it's just one of my biggest pet peeves is CG, especially if it's bad CG in the dark. So anyway.
Robots fighting is always better with because they're shiny. You have to have, it has to be during the day.
Yeah.
They're shiny. You want to see all the shiny pretty.
Yeah. All right, guys. Let's go ahead and talk about that end credit scene. Boom. The impact that this credit scene had on the MCU and in the movies, and that is Nick Fury showing up inside of Tony Stark's house and mentioning something about the Avengers. Kyle, I'm going to have you go first. This was probably the most important end credit scene in movie history.
It's up there. There's a couple different ways I want to look at this, but let's look at the importance of it first. To see Nick Fury, Samuel Jackson as Nick Fury, and I'll get to that in a second. But Dave, hear the words drop: Avengers Initiative. Every comic book fan went, "No way!" They went nuts, but they also went, "No way! They can't pull it off. There's no chance." They're like. But it was also a very bold move by Jon Favreau and Marvel Entertainment saying, yes, this is what we have planned here. And it changed everybody's perspective. And then everybody was like, let's wait a minute here. And the crazy thing about this was, even going through the entire phase one, we knew that this was the plan. We knew this was coming. I don't think for a lot of fans, it hit true reality until they got to the end of Captain America, and you will see Captain America again in the Avengers. And then all of a sudden, reality hit that we were really going to get this. But just to even
plus at the end, plus at the end of Captain America, it ends with him in current day New York with Nick Fury calming him down in New York, and he comes back then.
Yeah. But there's a flip side to this too, Kevin, and this is the importance of Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury. And this ties into a comic thing. In 2000, Marvel Comics started a line called the Ultimate line, and it was 2 books. It was Ultimate Spider-Man and Ultimate X-Men, and they became incredibly popular very quickly, and they added a 3rd book called The Ultimates, which was that universe's version of the Avengers. They introduced Nick Fury, and Nick Fury was Sam Jackson, and the artists knew exactly what they were doing. They love Sam Jackson. They designed this with, well, if they ever do this version of it, it's got to be Sam Jackson. And Sam Jackson has been campaigning to do something like this, because in the original Nick Fury in the comics was an old white dude who at one point was played by David Hasselhoff on television.
I remember that. Yeah.
So we have this version of Nick Fury now that's basically based off of Sam Jackson, and Favreau made the right choice and made that, said, we're going to make this happen. Marvel was completely on board. It's freaking Samuel Jackson. You don't tell Samuel Jackson no if Samuel Jackson wants to do something. So it was just all those elements coming together and hearing the words Avengers Initiative, and the world changed.
Lacey, comments?
Well, now I just really want David Hasselhoff to have a cameo in one of the new movies so that he and Samuel L. Jackson can kind of do that, like,
alternate universe, yes, multiverse.
I want that. Like, I need this to happen, and I know it would be kind of whatever. But wow, that'd be super fun. You know what? I think that tying all of them together with one, I just dig it. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, I could go on for 45 minutes and just.
Well, don't. But
so we're not gonna.
I get your point. But I what I find fascinating about this too, this has to be like the coolest thing for an actor as well. You come in for a day or two, you shoot your thing, and you know that you're like this. You are the connective tissue that's going to bring all of these heroes together. All you have to do, go in for a couple days, get dressed up, you get flown in, you do your boom. He does his thing, he does his Nick Fury thing. He comes in, he goes out, and then boom. But then he comes in for the Avengers, and he's got a much larger role, and then he comes out, and he's just in, boom, boom. Then he comes out, and he has a larger role again. What a great role. I'm so happy that Samuel Jackson is Nick Fury. He does it awesomely, and this was one of the most important end credit scenes because of the impact that it has, but the hope that it gave fans that like, oh crap, we just started this ride. And I love it. I think it's great. All right, guys. Another thing that we like to do is our Stan Lee cameo shout out. And Stan Lee is credited as playing himself, but he was dressed as Hef, aka Hugh Hefner, at the party. And is reference to, of course, the Playboy creator Hugh Hefner. Stan was dressed like Hefner. He had that bathrobe on and all that kind of stuff. So that was pretty cool. And this was the first film that comes out in 2008. Looks like we lost Lacee. We're going to try and get her back here. Little connection issues here, but we'll get her back. But until we do, Kyle, this was something we weren't knowing if we were going to keep getting cameos, right? If I remember correctly, we were going to. Yeah. I mean, he was kind of in there for obvious reasons, but this kind of then became a thing.
Yeah, Stan was notorious for cameos even before the MCU happened. He had a cameo back in the day in the Trial of the Incredible Hulk. I think he even had a cameo in the old Spider-Man TV series from the late 70s as well. So Stan was a little notorious for cameos, but yeah, you can't. I think he even had a cameo in a couple of the X-Men films at this point. So yeah, Stan's going to make sure he gets into this Iron Man movie and in the MCU films, and it became a fun thing. And this was the start of it. And to this day, I mean, I wish there was still a way we could somehow make Stan digitally appear in these MCU films going forward. But it was a magical thing that became very fun within the MCU, and this is the start of it. And I love the fact that he recognized him as Hef. You know, just
he was dressed like Hef, and it seemed like a party Hef would actually be at. Hugh Hefner. Lacee's back. Welcome back, by the way, Lacee. We're talking about Stan Lee's cameo in this, as referred to as Hef. Did you make much of this at the time when you first saw it?
Oh, well, I mean, he'd been doing the cameos for a while at this point, you know, between all the other random things that he had done. So I was kind of on the lookout for it just to see if it would happen.
Mallrats. He had that important one in Mallrats. Yeah.
But he had done a few other things too here and there. But yeah, so it was
Spider-Man films, right? He did the Spider-Man films. He was in those. Yep, definitely.
Yep.
So that's cool. All right. Okay. Guys, I want to bring this up because this is an interesting question I want to ask you guys. There was rumors we were going to get an Iron Man 4. I remember them, Kyle, right? I'm not crazy. There was rumors out there. So we had Iron Man. What?
I was just going to say, I think Iron Man 4 kind of got turned into a Captain America film.
Okay, that's true. That's what happened. However, here's the question I would like to put out to you guys. So Iron Man comes out in 2008. Iron Man 2 comes out in 2010. Iron Man 3 comes out 2013 and takes place 6 months after Avengers. If there was an Iron Man 4, where in the MCU timeline do you think it would have been? Kyle, I'll start with you.
This is easy. It takes place after Civil War. It takes place with Tony dealing with the fallout of Civil War, having the fallout with Cap. I think there's that. You can make it a very
good spot in there for that. Yeah.
You can make it a very easy solo Iron Man story against one of the classic Iron Man villains. Where Tony's still kind of trying to deal with, did I do the wrong thing? Did I do the right thing? And all the fallout of that and how it affects Tony directly.
Where is this compared to before Infinity War to you? Because I was thinking before Infinity War.
Oh yeah, it's definitely before Infinity
because the Pepper Potts relationship kind of got back together again, sort of, or they're not, they're together and they're really together.
Yeah, I think this maybe takes place just a few months after Civil War.
Okay,
and
gotcha.
That's probably around the same time. I'm going to say around the same time Black Widow takes place within that kind of time frame.
Lacee, your thoughts?
Yeah, I like what you're doing with Black Widow. Leave Black Widow there, and let's just say that in the next 2 years we get Iron Man 4, only it's not Tony Stark. Maybe it's Morgan, maybe it's
Mm.
Harley, maybe it's. I mean, there's so many.
I'm going to vote Harley right now. I'm just saying
I
it. I
love
love it.
that kid. That kid's amazing, and I want him to have. I want him to grow into that suit that he got. You know, like I want that to happen.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. So I like leaving it. I like leaving Black Widow exactly where you put it, but I would love to see an Iron Man in the future.
Kyle, did you have a quick thought about that?
well, remember we do have 2 major Iron Man related projects coming on to Disney Plus. We have Armor Wars with Rhodey as War Machine, and you have Ironheart, which is probably going to be the character who's going to take over the Iron Man role, at least for a little while in the MCU. So we do have a future
teenage girl, right? She's
yeah, that's Rory Williams, and there's still a lot of speculation we could see Robert Downey Jr. return, because in the Iron Man comics, she's given a suit of armor, an Iron Man suit of armor, after she builds her own, and Tony Stark has implanted his personality as the Jarvis AI in that suit.
Gotcha.
I love the character of Harley in Iron Man 3, and I'll talk more about that later when we do Iron Man 3. But man,
if Iron
yes.
Man taught us anything, is that we can have 49 Iron Men at one time.
It's true.
Like, we can have as many Iron Men as we want. We can have Harley, we can have Morgan, we can have, what did you say her name was? Ariana?
No, Rory Williams.
I don't know where I got Ariana, but whatever. We can have all the Iron Men we want.
All right, guys, let's get your final thoughts on Iron Man 2008 here in our chronological Infinity Saga here. Kyle, start with you.
The movie that started it all. There's really nothing more that needs to be said. If this movie bombs, we're not having this podcast right now.
This is true.
Robert Downey Jr. and Jon Favreau are the fathers of the MCU. As Kevin Feige might be the man who perfected it, but Robert Downey Jr. and Jon Favreau are the fathers of the MCU. And thank you. I mean, that's what you say with Iron Man. You say thank you, because we never thought we would ever see something like this. I still remember the day going into the Avengers for the midnight preview, first midnight showing, thinking, I never thought in my life I'd ever see anything like this. And if Iron Man does not succeed, if they don't take at the time, B-level Marvel superhero and make a phenomenal film out of it, we're back to Dolph Lundgren as Punisher. Kevin's going to shoot me for that comment, but
yeah, don't shoot any ill will on Dolph Lundgren as Punisher.
We're back to direct-to-video Marvel comic book movies and things like that. So, yeah.
Yes, we will be covering that movie on True Believers. Trust me. Lacey, your final thoughts on Iron Man 2008?
Fantastic. Like, there's nothing. I don't have anything negative to say. I loved the whole thing from beginning to end. It's probably one of the first movies in a long time that I saw it twice in one day. I mean, at the theater, I literally bought my ticket, went and saw it, and then went back out, bought another ticket, and went straight back into the next theater and watched it again. And I've done that with every MCU movie since. I love it.
It's one of those things where I love the fact that it is so good still, so revered by fans, that, you know, when you look back and you go, I'm going to do a rewatch. There's some people that do like the casual rewatch, and they'll go, you know what? I don't think I need to see, you know, Thor Dark World, even though it was referenced later, and I'm going to pass it. Or maybe I'm going to, you know, pass over, you know, Hulk or something like that. Iron Man, you don't pass over. You go back, you watch it from the very beginning, and it brings back all of these emotions. It brings back all this nostalgia. Makes you wonder, like, why did that little machine that Obadiah Stain used to kind of control Tony to steal his thing, and he did it against the terrorist? Is that going to come back? Let's bring that back. I don't know. All kinds of cool things like that. Lacey, do you have something else you want to say?
No. I mean, I love that, but paralysis only gets you so far.
That's true.
Like, when it comes to, like, you know, unless you're going to blow the building up, it's not going to help you very much. You know, they're going to come after you.
The one thing that this movie does make me feel a little sad for is when his house gets destroyed in Iron Man 3. I do love coming back to this house. I love that house in so-called Malibu and stuff like that. I just think it's a great house. Just needs a little bit of washing. That's all that it needs. All right, guys, let's close this out. Let's get some contact information here, how we can find us here on the Fandom Podcast Network. And, of course, as I mentioned top of the show, please visit our True Believers Marvel MCU Podcast Fandom group there on Facebook. And subscribe to the Fandom Podcast Network on YouTube. If you're watching this, thank you. Please hit like and subscribe. If you're listening to this, please go to the YouTube and watch it and do the same thing. It's fun. You get to see us acting fun and weird. So there you go. Right, Lacey. There you go. I'm not going to tell you what Lacey just did because if you're listening, I want you to go watch it. Our master feed for all of our audio podcasts can be found on Podbean at fpnet.podbean.com. And if you go there and you just want to listen to MCU stuff, you can go ahead and just click on the True Believers and you can stream everything there directly. And there's, of course, the Podbean app. You can do the same. And Fandom Podcast Network is on all major podcast platforms, which include, of course, Apple Podcast and iTunes. We also have a main Fandom Podcast Network Facebook page. Please go over there and give that a like. You can email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. And the Fandom Podcast Network is also on Instagram and Twitter. My name is Kevin Reitzel. I am on Twitter and Instagram at Spartan_Phoenix. Kyle, where can we find you?
You can find me, Aluminum Man, on Twitter at AKyleW or on Instagram at AKyleFandom.
Lacey, where can we find you?
I'm Lacey Pants, pretty much everywhere.
Kyle, I have a Iron Man figure with me right now. Do you recognize what I had to do, why I had to buy this particular figure, this Iron Man figure?
Because it's from Iron Man 3.
Can you bring it a little closer so we can see it better?
Yeah, I'll bring it up a little bit closer. I had to buy this particular Iron Man so I could get the entire Guardians of the Galaxy set to build Groot. So I had to buy this Iron Man. But you know what? That's a good thing. I like this Iron Man. It's pretty cool. I'm not sure which one this is from, though. Is this the one from Iron Man 3, Kyle?
No, now that I can see it a little bit closer. That's actually from a run where Iron Man was part of the Guardians of the Galaxy.
Oh, it's like okay, gotcha. Very cool. All right. All right, guys. Also, there's two ways you can support us. Please head over to our TeePublic store where you can get logos from all of our shows on any apparel you want. I am wearing a True Believers t-shirt on black. You can get them in blue. You can get them on mugs. You can get them on all kinds of things as well. And please head on over to Apple Podcast, iTunes, or wherever your podcast network catcher is. And please search Fandom Podcast Network and leave us a review for True Believers. My name is Kevin, and thank you guys so much. We hope you've enjoyed this chronological timeline rewatch of the Infinity Saga for Iron Man 2008. I'd like to thank, first of all, our special guest, Lacey. Thank you so much. Appreciate you, all the wonderful contributions that you do for us here at the Fandom Podcast Network. I'm looking forward to diving into Time Warp 1982 with you this year.
Sounds good. Can't wait. Thanks for having me.
Kyle, as always, thank you, brother. Good to have you on here.
Yeah, we're not quite done yet. We have some business we have to take care of here, Kevin. This is True Believers.
Yes.
Oh no.
The year ended. We took care and we've cleaned out your bank of Excelsior points, Kevin.
Oh, you ended
that.
Up with. I forgot about that.
well, Kevin ended up with all the trick arrows and the bow
from Hawkeye.
He even got the famed USB arrow.
Okay, but did I get something to shoot them with? I forgot.
Yeah, I gave you a bow.
Okay, all right.
So we are in a new year, and we have a little bit of time before the next original Marvel project hits, which is going to be Moon Knight in March. But we need to start building the bank up here a little bit. So you have done a phenomenal job hosting and with the notes for this episode of Iron Man. So I'm going to award you 4 Excelsior points, Kevin. Now, you can use them now. You can bank them. But you know what? I'm going to
use them now. I want to see what I get with 4 out of this. I'm kind of curious.
Okay, so since you're going to use 4, well, maybe we'll build this like Marvel action figures. You are getting the storage case for the Iron Man 2 briefcase armor. The armor's not in it yet, but you're getting the case, the storage.
That's okay. I could take that to Vegas and like bring that around with a little chain lock on the arm, like Happy had, and I'll just kind of walk around with it, going, oh, "Look at this! What's in here?" It's just my luggage.
Okay. Let's be honest though, that suitcase had to weigh a ton with the armor in it.
This is true. But I'll just put in. It'll be like my carry-on bag. You know?
I don't know if it'll get through security. I'm just saying, but
that's cool. I'll take it. That's great. But guys, before we go, one last thing. What's next? We've already teased it. We are going to be looking at Iron Man 2. Came out in 2010 because it takes place pretty much right after Iron Man. So we're going to go ahead and dive into that. I'm really looking forward to that. For some people, it's not their favorite, but there's a lot of reasons why I like this film, Kyle. And I'm sure we know one reason why we like it together, but we're not going to say right now.
Is it the birds? Bird. It's my favorite. I love it. When he just goes.
What did you say, Lacey? What did you say?
Bird. What's my bird?
She's
bird. Oh, Boyd's. I want my Boyd. Yes, I see.
There you go.
I want my Boyd. Yes.
But Kevin, I have one question for you. Can you speak Latin?
Thank you guys for joining us for another episode of the Fandom Podcast Network's True Believers, a Marvel MCU podcast. See you next time. Kyle, take us out.